there's a presentation layer, there's a business layer, there's a persistence layer, and the database layer. So even though we can have more layers also besides these 4 layers, but every layered architecture will have at least these 4 layers. There will be a presentation, business, persistence, and database layer. So that's how it looks like. This is the diagram for the n-layered architecture. At the top, we have the presentation layer, which is responsible for the display, the business layer, the persistence layer, and the database layer. And each of them has got its components or modules doing this. So that is the n-layered architecture. You put in all the modules which are related to each other and which are doing the work of display into one layer, then the business layer, all right, persistence layer, and the database layer. I'll just tell you what it is. So each layer of the layered architecture has a specific role and responsibility within this thing. So every layer has got its own specific responsibility. Now, a presentation layer would be responsible for handling all user interfaces and browser communication logic, whereas a business layer would be responsible for executing specific business rules associated with the request. So business layer is for executing the business rules, and this is for the display, display of the this thing. So now the characteristic of the n-layered architecture is that the presentation layer doesn't know or worry about how to get the customer data. It only needs to know the display that information on a screen in a particular format. So the business layer doesn't need to be concerned about how we have to format the customer data for displaying on the screen, or even where the input or the customer data is coming from. It only needs to get data from the persistence layer to perform the business logics against that data. Okay, calculate values or aggregate data and pass the information up to the presentation layer. So that is what we call it as separation of concerns. So the n-layered architecture has got separation of concepts, and this is one of the powerful features of the layered architecture pattern. Now, the components within a specific layer will deal only with the logic that pertains to that layer. ठीक है ना? तो अगर presentation layer है, they will only deal with the presentation logic. अगर business layer है, they will only, the components which are there will only deal with the business logic. So none of the layer is concerned about how the other layer works. So basically we are doing a component classification. So we are delegating or giving roles and responsibility to the different layers in this architecture. Now this makes it easy to develop, test, govern, and maintain applications because we have got roles and responsibilities defined and independent of one another, and they are all you can say that they are all kept in one layer, or they are all collected in one layer. If it's if it is an interface layer, presentation layer, it will just be concerned with the components, or the modules will be concerned with the how to present. It will be concerned how to process, how the data is coming, how the data is getting output is not the botheration of the business layer. Similarly, persistence layer and the database layer. So we say there is a separation of concerns in the n-layered architecture. Now, okay, so this is one important feature. This is one important feature of the layered architecture pattern, that is the separation of concerns. That is why you see there is we don't have any connection between these two layers. You see that they are all boxes which have got some space between each other, because each is responsible for the tasks and the roles assigned to it, and there will be only the exchange of information without a knowledge of how one layer is carrying out its task. So that is what is called as the separation of concerns. Now let's see the key concepts of the n-layered architecture. So first is the closed layers and request access. ठीक है ना, ये closed layers हैं, तो ये है, और ये request access कैसे जाती है, let us see that. Now closed layer concept. Now each of the layers in the architecture is marked as being closed. So this is a very important concept in the layered architecture pattern. Now what it means is that as a request moves from layer to layer, it must go through the layer right below it to go to the next layer below. ठीक है ना, sequentially जा सकती है, ये नहीं कि प्रेजेंटेशन लेयर से सीधा रिक्वेस्ट परसिस्टेंस लेयर में चली गई या प्रेजेंटेशन लेयर से सीधा डेटाबेस है, ये एक सीक्वेंशियल है, ठीक है ना. दिस इज अ क्लोज लेयर. So first it will go here, then it will go here, then it will go here, then it will go here. It cannot go directly from presentation layer to database layer, from business layer to database layer. It must go through the persistent. What we call it as a closed layer concept. That is, a request must move from one layer to another if it wants to go to a layer below. Requests originating from the presentation layer must first go to the business layer and then to the persistence layer before finally hitting the database layer. So the second, this is one concept, closed layer concept. Then layer of isolation. This is another concept of the entire architecture. That changes made in one layer of the architecture generally do not impact or affect the components in other layers. रखा है, so they will not impact or affect the components in the other layers. So okay, so the change isolated to the components within that layer and also possibly another associated layer also. So not if let the changes permeate to the layer below. They are just isolated, or they are just visible to the layer in which they are done. So if the presentation layer is allowed direct access to the persistence layer, then changes made to SQL within the persistence layer would impact both the business layer and the presentation layer. Okay, so why this is done is because if a change is made in one layer, then it will also impact the other layers also. So what happens is this produces a very tightly coupled application. अगर हम चाहें कि भाई changes are visible or changes can permeate to other layers also, then obviously changes made to one layer later on, you will have to make changes to other layers also. So this gives you a tightly coupled architecture with lots of interdependency between the different components of layers and interlayer also. So this type of architecture becomes very hard to maintain and expensive. So that is why we have a layers of isolation. We do not let the changes of one layer seep or permeate or visible to the other layer. Let it be isolated to the layer in question, because otherwise it gives you a tightly coupled architecture. So the layer of isolation concept means that each layer is independent of other layers, thereby having little or no knowledge of the inner workings of the other layers in architecture. Is that all right? So these are the key concepts. One is the layer of isolation, and another is the closed layer concept. Now we look up, I'll stop it here for today. We look at the problem with the layered architecture next time. Okay, there are problems with this architecture. Therefore, it is not applicable for all kinds of software designings, but it is the most easiest way to arrange your modules and your components, and therefore it is the most natural way for developers to fall into making a layered architecture. It works well for certain applications, but not well for all kinds of applications with different performance requirements. Is that clear? Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
तो इसका जो है, अब जो हम इसके limitations I'll take up next time, and then we'll start with another this thing, architecture pattern also. So I'll just post one this thing, attendance for you people, and I'll post the for government. You kindly make the changes so that it's in a more readable form. It's a very clumsy and confusing way. Even though people have done it, but like it should be, the clarity is not there. I want to say today is what, 28th.
Yes, ma'am.
So the all right. Have you got it? Has everybody received it? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'm leaving the meeting. Mark your attendances and you can also leave the meeting. Okay. All the best to all.